Thank you. Thank you. I usually speak loud enough that I don't need a mic, but I'll stand here, and if anybody can hear me, just let me know. I think I can speak sufficiently loud. We will have a short video, about 15 minutes, which is very dramatic. So the title of my talk is "Why Did Kennebec Valley Mainers Conspire to Overthrow the Queen of Hawaii?" Because in fact, that's exactly what happened, together with some traders in Hawaii. So I will ask sort of a trick question here for you. You don't have to respond, but just think about it. How did Hawaii legally become a state? Conquest, invasion, plebiscite, treaty, all of the above, or none of the above? Now, somebody wisely said that when a lie is told over and over and over and over and over and over and over, eventually it becomes accepted as truth, but then the person who actually tells the truth is regarded as a raving lunatic. Well, that's probably how you'll think of me for the first few minutes of my presentation, because the correct answer to the question is none of the above. It never became part of the U.S. legally. Now the U.S. gained control, clearly, and still does. But the government there is basically a subsidiary of the U.S. government. It's not a legitimate government legally, and I'll go into that to some degree. The standard history book will tell you in 1893 there was a revolution that overthrew the Queen. 1898 there was annexation. 1902 was the Enabling Act that created the Republic of Hawaii, or rather became a territory of Hawaii. Then there was 1941 with the Pearl Harbor attack. 1959, a plebiscite ratifying statehood. This is the standard but false history. So I use an analogy sometime. You've probably seen magic shows where a magician will reach into he'll show you an empty hat, and he spins around, and he pulls out a bird. Maybe there was like ribbons or something in there first, and the ribbons allegedly became a bird. Well, we know the ribbon didn't become a bird. Similarly, Hawaii did not become part of the U.S. It's as we'll see shortly here. Now, the real history has been unearthed in recent years by superb legal and historical research done by Hawaiians. And one primary source, and which I used, was Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, published in 1898. She's a very articulate woman, both in Hawaiian and in English, totally fluent and totally mastered both languages. Another was President Cleveland's address to Congress in December of that same year, in which he vehemently denounced the coup against the Queen, calling it an act of war, and he will have nothing to do with it. He acted honorably. This was after he had sent his own personal representative, James Blount, to do an investigation, because he was hearing competing stories, one from the coup makers who wanted, and the answer to the question is, why did Kennebec Valley Mainers conspire? Well, they were part of the annexation, trend, the westward movement, the manifest destiny, that whole mentality. And so that was the answer to that question. And so President Cleveland's address in full is Appendix A in my book. Appendix B is the apology for having overthrown the government, and very rare that you'll find an empire apologizing for its imperial behavior. That was also 100 years later in 1993 and signed by Bill Clinton. After there was this upsurge, which we were going to see here, the opening part on the video will show a mass of 12,000 people coming out on exactly to the day 100 years after the Queen was deposed. And she never surrendered, but neither did she want to fight the United States, because it would have been a losing battle, and more of her people would have been. So she very shrewdly came up with a statement saying, I will temporarily and conditionally yield my authority until such time as my appeal is heard in Washington and I'm replaced and I'm restored to the position to which I have the honor of serving. Words to that effect. Very eloquent and very legal and has great political and legal import. Now the other thing here is the role of the Kennebec Valley Mainers. And I will mention here a few of these. For one, the Kennebec Journal was founded in 1850 by Luther Severance, who shortly thereafter was appointed commissioner, later called minister, and now would be called ambassador to Hawaii by President Zachary Taylor, shortly after the annexation of Texas, which I'm sure rang a bell for him when we got to Hawaii. So after he founded the Kennebec Journal, James Blaine took it over and partnered with John Stevens of Mount Vernon, Maine, as co-editor publisher. So Stevens was actually the first editor, although Blaine was more or less the publisher. And both of them adopted the enthusiasm that Severance had for the eventual gaining control of Hawaii, as did their ambitious contemporary colleague, Theodore Roosevelt. Manifest Destiny. Blaine was an outstanding orator and quickly became Speaker of the House in Congress, leaving Stevens to run the Kennebec Journal as editor and publisher. Blaine went on to become Secretary of State under Benjamin Harrison, and it was he who then appointed Stevens to be Minister of Hawaii in 1889. And Stevens was born in 1820, the same year the missionaries first went to Hawaii, 1 year after the death of Kamehameha the Great, the first king of Hawaii. And he had come from Honolulu as a young man. He became a Unitarian minister at that time, and his father-in-law was a ship's captain also from Honolulu, as was his own wife. And both Blaine and Stevens were founding members of the Republican Party in 1856. As editor of the Kennebec Journal, Stevens was no doubt influenced by his mentor, Severance, with regard to his experience in Hawaii. James Blaine was head of the U.S. State Department and assigned Stevens as minister in the same role as Severance before him. The father of Sanford Dole, who became the alleged president of the so-called Republic of Hawaii, was born in 1844, shortly after the arrival of his parents, Daniel and Emily Dole, who had come as missionaries from Skowhegan and Honolulu, respectively. And both had arrived in Hawaii as a married couple. And Sanford had also married a Maine woman. So that's kind of the beginning and the connections to Maine. You will also note in this, you will see a picture of Sanford Dole, who we just referenced, and also he was representing allegedly the Hawaii new government, the coup government. And then there's Harold Sewell from Bath, representing the U.S. side. As kind of an interesting thing, I was introduced to the great-grandnephew of Harold Sewell in Bath a couple of years ago. There was a shipbuilding family, not connected apparently to Bath Iron Works. It was a different operation. But all of these main connections make it quite interesting. So I think that would be a good time to review the video. This is the book, by the way. It's a Hawaiian chant. There you go.
We, the voices behind the face of the Hawaiian nation, the Hawaiian race. Rise for justice, the day has come for all our people to stand as one.
Be steadfast.
We the voices behind the face of the Hawaiian nation, the Hawaiian race. Rise for justice, the day has come for all our people to stand as one.
These are but a handful of the warriors whose contributions have served to promote the dignity and prosperity of the Hawaiian nation. What is the common motivation that drives our modern-day warriors? What is the source of our convictions? Listen carefully, for our cries echo the voices of an earlier era.
Defend our birthright to be free, to give our children liberty.
Look closely, and we may soon discover that we are who we were.
Gone the days of the Alami ways. Power of the people is the people. Woka people get aloha, I know. Aloha, I know.
August 12, 1998 marks the centennial of the purported annexation of the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. To truly appreciate the significance of this day, we must understand what transpired over 100 years ago. O ke aui hala kalamaku o ke ala I ke kupu kupu. The past is the beacon that will guide us into the future.
On August 12, 1898, during annexation ceremonies at Iolani Palace, two figures stood on a platform before an international gathering. Sanford B. Dole and U.S. Minister Harold Sewell exchanged treaty ratifications annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the United States, or so it appeared. But was it really a treaty of annexation? And did Hawaii really become a territory of the United States? What is a treaty? A treaty, in its simplest terms, is a contract or agreement between two nations. Under international law and practice, a simple three-step process is all that is required for a treaty to be legal and binding. First, a representative from the executive branch of both governments sign and consent to a written agreement. This signed agreement is then submitted to the two respective countries for ratification or approval. In the United States, that approval is based on a 2/3 vote of the Senate. With both countries having consented to the terms and conditions of the agreement, all that remains to consummate the treaty is for both countries to exchange copies of the ratified agreement. That agreement, under international law, is now considered a bona fide and legally binding contract or treaty. In 1849, a treaty of friendship, commerce, and navigation between the United States of America and His Majesty Kamehameha III had been concluded and signed in Washington. Ratification by both countries were exchanged in Honolulu on August 24, 1850, and the treaty was in force from that date for the term of 10 years and further, until either party gave notice to the other of its intention to terminate. By the late 1800s, the Hawaiian Kingdom enjoyed the distinction of being a member of the family of nations, having entered into treaties with 20 foreign powers. Immediately following a treasonous attempt to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani in January of 1893, enemies of the kingdom, now calling themselves the Provisional Government, departed for Washington, D.C. to sign a treaty of annexation with the United States. Their sole intention was to achieve annexation at any cost. However, before the United States Senate could ratify the proposed treaty, newly elected President Grover Cleveland, confronted with the facts of the overthrow, withdrew the treaty from further consideration and vowed never to allow the Treaty of Annexation to be resubmitted. Having failed at this first attempt to obtain a Treaty of Annexation with the United States, the Provisional Government on July 4, 1894, declared itself to be the Republic of Hawaii and maintained its opposition to the restoration of the Hawaiian Kingdom government, as called for by President Cleveland. On June 16, 1897, with Grover Cleveland now out of office, a second effort to annex the Hawaiian Islands to the United States was attempted. A treaty was signed in Washington, D.C. between representatives of the self-proclaimed Republic of Hawaii and the newly elected President of the United States, William McKinley. The following day in Washington, Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani submitted a formal letter of protest to President McKinley, asserting that this proposed Treaty of Annexation violated the existing Treaty of 1850 between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States.
Because said treaty ignores all professions of perpetual amity and good faith made by the United States in former treaties, it is thereby in violation of international law. Therefore, I, Liliuokalani of Hawaii, do hereby call upon the President to withdraw said treaty from further consideration. I ask the Honorable Senate of the United States to decline to ratify that treaty.
Word of what had transpired in Washington soon reached the islands. Anticipating that the U.S. Senate would reconvene in December to consider the second attempt at annexation, an aggressive campaign was initiated, intending to fortify the Queen's second letter of protest. On September 6, 1897, James Kaulia, president of the Hui Aloha, the Hawaiian Patriotic League, gave a stirring speech before thousands at Palace Square in Honolulu. He said agreeing to annexation was like agreeing to being buried alive. He asserted that a mass refusal by the people could prevent annexation.
Let us take up the honorable struggle. Do not be afraid. Be steadfast in aloha for your land and be united in thought. Protest forever the annexation of Hawaii until the very last patriot lives.
A petition to the President, Congress, and people of the United States, otherwise known as the Monster Petition, was read and approved at this rally, asking that no further steps be taken toward the ratification of the treaty. The men and women of the Hui Aloha Aina, through the efforts of many loyal and dedicated Hawaiian subjects, launched a full-scale petition drive that lasted approximately 2 months. They went from island to island, from shore to shore, leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to document opposition to the proposed treaty. The petition was printed in both English and Hawaiian.
We, the undersigned, Native Hawaiian subjects and residents who are members of the Hawaiian Patriotic League of the Hawaiian Islands and other citizens who are in sympathy with the League, earnestly protest against the annexation of the Hawaiian Islands to the United States of America in any form or shape.
By November of 1897, they had successfully gathered the signatures and support of over 21,000 patriots. In a joint effort, the Hui Kalai Aina also gathered through their petition drive nearly 17,000 signatures. Together, there were over 38,000 signatures, representing 95% of the Native Hawaiian population. James Kaulia, David Kalaukalani, John Richardson, and William Auld traveled to Washington to deliver the petitions to the United States Senate. In December, while they watched from the gallery, the text of the monster petition was read on the floor of the Senate, and the signature petitions were formally accepted. As a result of these protests from the Queen and her people, the United States Senate failed to obtain the required 2/3 vote as mandated by the U.S. Constitution to ratify a treaty. By March of 1898, the Treaty of Annexation was dead. But expansionists in the United States Congress, led by Senator Morgan, would not let the dream of annexation die. Within days, they devised a plan to bypass the requirements of their own constitution in an effort to annex Hawaii.
The Hawaii Annexation Treaty lags in the Senate. The number of votes needed will not come forth. The advocates of the scheme are now preparing to resort to a joint resolution, which may be put through by a simple majority in each House of Congress. In other words, if Congress should strictly obey the Constitution, annexation could not take place.
In March of 1898, they introduced Joint Resolution number 55 to provide for annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. The Joint Resolution, otherwise known as the Newlands Resolution, was then passed by a simple majority in each House of Congress and signed by President McKinley on July 7, 1898. This was the document presented by U.S. Minister Harold Sewell to Sanford Dole at the annexation ceremony in August of 1898. Dole responded, "I now yield up to you, representing the government of the United States, the sovereignty and the public property of the Hawaiian Islands." For the past 100 years, it was assumed that Joint Resolution 55 possessed the power and effect of a treaty. However, according to international law and practice, it did not. Moreover, under U.S. constitutional law, a joint resolution does not have the power to extend beyond the borders of the United States. Without a treaty of annexation, American sovereignty cannot exist in these islands. Nothing has legally transpired which could affect the lawful existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom and its subjects. There was no annexation.
The past is the beacon that will guide us into the future. What took place on August 12, 1898 was nothing more than an illusion. An illusion that we went from being Hawaiian subjects to American citizens. The darkness and confusion of the past 100 years is now being destroyed by the light of knowledge. Hawaiians say haveo, a glow of light. For it is in this light that the heroic deeds of our ancestors are revealed. The responsibility is now ours to carry on where they left off. From resistance to affirmation, we are who we were.
Gone the days of the Alami ways. Ekiko, ika, piko, kamana, okapai. Power of the people is the piko. Oka, piko, get out, oka, aina. Aloha, warriors, we in unity rise up to set our children free. Come, my brother, and listen to Mother Papa calling you there.
So now you know the rest of the story, as they used to say. Now, if in fact what happened to Hawaii was legitimate, then today Congress could unilaterally, without consulting the Danes annex Denmark. Or China could say, after they have their Congress, say, okay, we're going to annex the United States. And if, you know, obviously those are things that are absurd. It was just as absurd that Hawaii was annexed in the same procedure. There's no validity to it at all. And yet, because of the narrative that's carried forward and the presence of 118 military installations in Hawaii, U.S. installations, you know, they basically say, we're here and we ain't going. It's like the elephant in the kitchen. So, but things change. Things change. In my book, I do a whole chapter on the example of Lithuania, which similarly was fraudulently annexed by the Soviet Union in 1840, after having been promised their freedom because they'd been controlled by Russia in the past history. Lenin, who was a true believer of the right of nations to independence and self-determination, had declared unequivocally the right of the Lithuanians to have their freedom, as he did with Finland. And so it was until Stalin in 1940 abrogated that and basically took over through a whole series of fraudulent methods, which I devote a whole chapter to that, as a parallel example of reversing what was apparently a takeover and integration into an empire. So, and then there's been other massive changes of land. The Louisiana Purchase was another example. What happened to Mexico, you know, being the U.S. grabbing that, and a forced treaty. In both of those cases, there were treaties, but they were unequal because the U.S. had the dominant position. Now, not only was the procedure wrong in terms of treaty versus joint resolution of Congress, but also the very government in Hawaii was totally illegitimate, as declared by none other than President Cleveland himself. It was a fraudulent government. Did not represent the people. It was a coup by basically a dozen men. It was that very dramatic. So let's see here. I guess we could. Oh yeah, an example that I use is on a more personal level. Suppose you had a fine estate that had been in your family for generations. There was no mortgage, and you're living there peacefully. And then one day you come home from work and you find another family moving in, and there's police there, and they're taking all your belongings out, putting them out on the street. What's going on? Well, this man bought your property. No, I never sold that. And the policeman shows him a document that has a power of attorney with your name forged on the power of attorney that authorizes the sale of your property to this third individual. Imagine how you'd feel. Well, that's what happened with Hawaii. It was a similar kind of thing, because this alleged Republic of Hawaii, headed by Dole, had no authority to conduct that transaction with Sewell to the United States. So I think this might be a good time to open up for questions. Yes?
You mentioned the Dole family.
Yeah.
I remember reading in James Michener's Hawaii, he went into a great deal of detail about how the Dole family was really leveraging this whole event. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Well, I think the founder of Dole Pineapple was, I think, a cousin of Sanford Dole, if I'm not mistaken. But it was the sugar planters, you know, the business people. They were Caucasian. I mean, that were clearly behind the coup. I mean, it wasn't just one person. Another key person was Lawrence Thurston, who had come from Massachusetts, who was he was the founder of the Honolulu Advertiser, which still is in existence as a daily newspaper in conjunction with the Star Bulletin, which I think it's called Star Advertiser now. They used to be competing. While I was there, they were still competing newspapers. And he had come from Massachusetts born in 1858. And so he had attended law school and returned to Hawaii with a law degree. Anyway, enough about him. But yeah, it was basically the kind of crony capitalist that we see today, except the early versions of that. Yes, Sue, and then George.
At the time of the big election of signatures by the Native Hawaiian people, how many non-Native Hawaiian people were living in Hawaii?
Okay, that's a good question. There's in the book, there's a rundown of the 1896 population. Hawaiians were still in the majority, although their numbers had been reduced. They may have had as many as 1 million people when Captain Cook came in 1778, just 2 years after the American Revolution. That was the first time there'd been European contact. But the numbers had been greatly reduced through disease and warfare among themselves. Kamehameha was pretty brutal in consolidating his rule, so it wasn't that everybody was love and peace, unfortunately, in Hawaii too. So there was a handful, I think it was maybe 3,000 U.S. citizens, and maybe 30, 40, 50, I think, or maybe 90,000 Hawaiians. There was the Japanese and Chinese had just begun to come. I think that they started with Chinese, and they were there. They were not allowed to be full citizen because they were expected to go back eventually. So they were kind of like guest workers, as they might call. But there's I'd have to, you know, I could look it up what the numbers are. But let me go on with questions. Anyway, the Hawaiians were the great majority at that time. Currently, they're about 20% of the population, part or full Hawaiian, mostly part Hawaiian now because of intermarriages. But what is important is that there is a massive understanding of what we've just seen. Thousands of people understand this in Hawaii, Hawaiian and otherwise, and there's a real determination to see this through. Nobody in the U.S. practically, very, very few people have a clue. And I have a hard time getting people to pay attention. I'm glad you're here today, but and I'm open to other events as well. That's kind of what I've taken on as my great Hawaiian word, kuleana, whose area of responsibility to promote this concept. And they are determined, like the Lithuanians, you know, we're not going to give up until we get our independence back again. And they were peaceful. They had, during the time from the founding of the country of Hawaii until its eclipse by U.S. intrusion in 1893, they've never had a war with anybody. And they would like to be, you know, a place of peace, a place to, you know, a sort of a neutral country like Switzerland, and just have good relations with everybody. Yes, George, you had a question.
Yes, those two parts. I'm curious. This movie was made in the 90s, and it's now 2018. I was just curious, just where things sit right now, and also just in this annexation, was there also land disenfranchisement, or just so? What's the situation around ownership of land?
There have been diplomatic efforts. We don't hear much about it because it's unlike another example of occupation, which is Palestine. There's nobody shooting anybody. There's nobody blowing things up. There's no bombings. There's no mass arrests. None of this is happening. It's all on the educational and diplomatic level. And there have been, I mean, there's connection with Native Americans. There's connection with other Native peoples around the world. There's been delegations to the UN, and an immense amount of education. Recently, there was the foremost authority on this, and my mentor, Keanu Sai, had met with Federico Lenzerini, who was an international lawyer from Italy, who was persuaded of the truth of all of this, and is helping to take this to the International Court of Arbitration. And we'll see where that can go, because they don't trust the U.S. court. Whenever it comes up in the U.S. courts, they just dismiss it. Hey, this is settled long ago, get out of here. I mean, that's understandably, they don't want to admit how fraudulent their claim is. But it's at an international level that this will have to be solved. But let me get to the second question, which was
Land.
the land. Yes, yes. Indeed. There was they not only took over the government land, but the private land of the whole royalty families, which was extensive. And that was called Ceded Land, C-E-D-E-D, Ceded. And again, it was unilateral on the part of the usurpers. And along the way, Hawaiians have lost a lot of their land, even ones that was in their name, sometimes because of not understanding English and being, told, hey, you sign this and, we'll give you da-da-da-da-da-da, whatever it happened to be. And of course, the trauma, the cultural trauma of this entire episode has carried on generation after generation. So, like black people and Mexican Americans in this country, you find that significantly disproportionate of people in prison with health issues, educational limitations. I mean, there are obviously exceptions, some brilliant scholars. But yeah, there was massive land disenfranchisement. And there are areas which are sort of Hawaiian communities where you find a greater proportion of Hawaiians in Hawaii. Just, like cultural identity, wanting to be together. But basically they were, like the Native American, kind of pushed to the least favorable areas. So that kind of figures the question. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, does the royal family still play any role in Hawaii?
Okay, there are people who are descendants of the royalty, and they have some influence. There's occasionally people who will proclaim themselves kind of unilaterally with their group to be the next king or the next queen, but there's competing ones. And none of them really have that legitimacy to do so. What happened in 1875, when there was no heir, was they had an election. And David Kalakaua won the election, and he's the one who ruled until 1891 when he died, and that's when Liliuokalani took over, his sister, who was the designated heir. And she, of course, had designated, I believe it was her niece, Kaiulani, but because of the coup, she was never allowed to take over and be the ruler. So there are people who are descendant. Genealogy plays a big role in Hawaiian culture. Yes?
Has the UN ever taken up the issue of their liberation? And a second part of this is there currently any active initiative to just bring this up again in Congress?
Well, not in Congress. Actually, there was this Akaka bill, which is named after Senator Daniel Akaka, who's Native Hawaiian, of course. And he was basically not challenging the issue of U.S. jurisdiction, but was taking the position that there ought to be official federal recognition comparable to what is given to certain Native American tribes, and sort of have maybe some reparations and a land base. And so he was promoting that as a position, which had never got anywhere in Congress, which is just as well, as far as I'm concerned, and the advanced people who do not want simply to be recognized as a, quote, tribe who are comparable, but rather independent. I mean, I add one more thing. A couple of years ago, the head of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which is a state agency that deals with Native Hawaiian issues. I had written a letter to John Kerry, then Secretary of State, which boiled down to, after you get through the legalese, say, by what constitutional provision does the United States claim to have jurisdiction over Hawaii? And of course, he didn't get an answer. Instead, what they got was a delegation from the Interior Department, rather than the State Department, who came to Hawaii and had hearings all through the different islands. And basically, they were told in no uncertain terms, what the hell are you doing here? We want to talk to the State Department as an independent country. You know, we're not interior to the U.S., so be gone. And generally, they were polite but very determined people to deal with that. The other thing that I had referenced earlier was an attempt to bring this to the International Court of Arbitration, which an indirect case was taken in 2001 by Keanu Sai himself, and did a very good presentation to a trio of jurists, you know, like very, very high level, I mean, comparable to a U.S. Attorney General in England. I think they were mostly from England. And they found that indeed Hawaii was an independent country, which should be evident to anybody, in the 1800s, and they did not give up their sovereignty. But because the U.S. Would not participate in the procedure, it couldn't be arbitrated. And so it was kind of left hanging. And so now they said, but they recommended you could have a fact-finding effort through the International Court of Arbitration, which is what they're attempting to do now with the help of this Federico Lazzarini and Keanu Sai, who both gave a presentation, I guess maybe a year ago in Hawaii, and like 500 people came out. I mean, this is the kind of turnout that you get maybe for something like a Chris Hedges or a Naomi Klein. You know, I mean, so this is a big, big issue in Hawaii, and outside of Hawaii, it just doesn't even show up on the radar. Next question, yes.
Excuse me. Well, it seems that making this issue more widely known is crucial. A few years ago, there was a movie that came out with George Clooney.
Yes, I saw that.
Inheritors, The Inheritance,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
He seems very sympathetic
Yeah,
and
that
cares a
makes
lot about what's going on in Hawaii.
Yeah, that was a really recent movie.
Is there any way to use, you know, publicity like that or get him involved in this
Invite me
cause?
to go someplace.
Pardon?
Invite me to go places. I'll do the same thing I did today.
Yeah, but I was just
Good.
saying, but to get people like with, you know, more name recognition, I guess. And get someone like Clooney to work with this.
Well,
I mean, most Americans probably have never.
exactly. That's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book for Americans. I didn't write it for Hawaiians, because they know. So I wrote it for people, you know, like the audience here and others. I mean, all I look for is invitations, you know, and I can do the same thing. I gave one recently at Bates College, which was in my alma mater, to about 35. It was 2 history classes combined, and that went well. And I also did to the Kennebec Valley Historical Association, which of course is very relevant because of all the people who had come from the Kennebec Valley to overthrow the Queen.
That was amazing, the Maine connections.
Yeah. So that was well received. That was about maybe 2 years ago at the State Capitol Library that was set up through there. So I'll do talks if I just get invitations. Yes, 1, 2.
Assuming that this situation was resolved in favor of what the Hawaiians would like to have it resolved,
Yeah.
what would it look like? They would become an independent country. They would stop being a state of the United States.
Exactly.
They would not have representation in Congress.
Exactly.
What about the military installations in Hawaii? They would be out.
No.
That would have to be negotiated.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, that would have to be treaties, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Actual
Have to be a treaty, a real treaty, and it would have to take place over time, and probably with offsetting compensation, because the military has used this land for a century So that would be like, you know, what's the rental value over there? And on the other hand, they have a lot of infrastructure. They have all kind of buildings and roads and housing and so forth. And so there could be offsetting, you know, claims. So that would have to be negotiated. Yes.
I just wondered if you could say more about the historic buildup of the military, because given the obvious strategic...
Well, the key thing was Pearl Harbor. Even before the coup, they had negotiated the right to use Pearl Harbor as a coaling station, you know, refuel, because going from Asia to, you know, the U.S. mainland and back.
When was Pearl Harbor established? That was
early
early
maybe 1870s or so. And then after that, once this coup took place, then they started coming in, the businesses started coming in, with what's called the Big Five corporations. I won't enumerate, but they basically dominated Hawaii's entire commercial existence for the next 50 years, until in maybe into the 1950s or so. And even